Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I've lived on my family's farm for as long as I can remember. My grandfather left it to me when he passed, knowing how much I loved the wide open fields and forests that make up the 200 acres. One of my favorite things to do is explore the miles of trails that wind through the woods and connect to the back pastures. Most of the trails have been there for decades, used by hunters and hikers who know to ask permission before accessing private land. I don't mind sharing as long as people are respectful, but lately some folks on loud, souped-up off-road vehicles have been tearing up my trails without asking. It started last month when I heard a ruckus coming from the north side of the property. I hopped in my truck and headed out to find two guys on big mud-covered ATVs cruising down one of my trails. I flagged them down and politely asked them to leave, explaining this was private property. They got snippy with me, saying they had just as much right to use the trails as anyone else. I pointed to the multiple no trespassing signs posted along the trail, but they just laughed and sped off. This kept happening over the next few weeks. Different groups of off-roaders would party on my trails all hours of the day and night, keeping me up with their noisy engines. They'd leave behind trash and damage the paths I'd spent years maintaining. I started asking around town and found out these guys were part of a local off-roading club. They'd gotten it in their heads that any wooded land was public use and saw my clearly marked private farm as their personal playground. After getting nowhere by talking to them directly, I decided sterner measures were needed. I spoke to the sheriff and consulted a lawyer about my options. The sheriff agreed to patrol the trails more but said he couldn't sit out there round the clock. He suggested I post trail cameras to get evidence of the trespassing. The cameras ended up being a huge help. They captured multiple instances of the off-roaders blatantly ignoring the no trespassing signs. Armed with clear photographic proof, the lawyer drafted up official cease and desist notices that I mailed to the individuals violating my property. Most of them got the message loud and clear, but a couple of the worst offenders kept right on coming around. One Sunday morning, I heard engines revving outside my house and peeked out to see two familiar ATVs tearing down the South Trail. That was the last straw for me. I'd had it with these disrespectful lawbreakers. I jumped in my truck and followed their trail, catching up to them a mile into my woods. When they refused to leave, I whipped out my cell phone and called the sheriff right in front of them. While on the phone, I calmly informed them I was filing criminal trespassing charges and suing for property damage. Turns out, rich boy bullies don't like facing real consequences. They sputtered excuses, but I stood firm, pointing to the exit sign and reminding them this was their last chance to leave on their own terms. The sheriff arrived promptly and took down all the details. We presented the ample evidence stacked against them, including the recordings of me directly telling them to leave my land. These two had run out of lies and excuses. The sheriff hauled them off, and they pled guilty to trespassing charges to avoid the lawsuit. Word must have spread because I haven't had any more off-roaders messing with my trails since. The sheriff did have to ticket a couple of local kids on dirt bikes who didn't know better, but they were very apologetic. I'm just glad I can enjoy my property in peace again. All's well that ends well. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I am the landlord of some apartments in the city. I sign the lease agreements and go over the basics with tenants, although they don't usually want me to spend hours delving into the fine print. 99% of the time, it's a breeze and everything is fine. One lady, let's call her Karen, had been paying her rent via a new bank account and new checks for the last several months. All of a sudden, we got several chargeback fees on our account. She had put a stop payment on the checks and closed the account. I immediately called her. Me. Hey, Karen, it looks like your checks bounced for the last few months. I just wanted to make sure everything is okay. Karen. Oh no, I promise I'll get this fixed. Me. Okay. You've been a good tenant in the past, so I'll give you a month. Needless to say, a month passed and she didn't pay, so I called her again. Me. Hey, Karen, we still haven't received payment, so I'm afraid we'll have to file for eviction. Karen. Oh God, no, I'm an old woman. I can't afford to be evicted. I'm trying so hard to pay. Can you give me another shot? Me. As long as you pay before the court date, the eviction doesn't have to go through. The court date arrives, and guess who hasn't paid yet? At court, the judge rules for a 24-hour notice to vacate. Karen, in tears, comes up to me afterward. Karen, can you please give me another chance? I can't afford to go anywhere else. Me. I'm sorry, Karen, but the only way I could do that is if you paid off the debt. signed a new lease agreement, plus a first month's rent, plus a new security deposit. And I don't think that's going to happen. Goodbye. So I left, and I thought that was that. My maintenance guy would come in a few days to do the inspection and clean up, and then we'd put it on the market. He shows up a few days later, and there's a problem, they're still there. So I call the sheriff to schedule a set-out. A problem, though. According to the sheriff, the 24-hour notice was no longer valid, as we had struck up a deal afterward. So the court had reversed the eviction decision. I had no recollection of having decided that this would happen. I called the court, and they informed me that the eviction was no longer valid, as apparently I told the sheriff that I was giving her more time, invalidating the decision, etc. What happened was that Karen had called the sheriff and told him that the court had reversed the decision because of a non-existent deal. She had then called the court and told them that the sheriff could not evict her, as I had waived the notice. And she had used my words, twisting my denial of an extension into a deal. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I sent Karen a copy of a new lease agreement, asking for the debts, in addition to rent for a first month, and a new security deposit. Her lawyer then contacted me. Yes, she had the money to hire a lawyer somehow, informing me that in fact her old lease agreement was still valid, as my deal, the one that would require a new lease agreement, invalidated the eviction decision, so I filed for eviction on the grounds that she had not paid for several months now, 5 to be exact, and therefore had invalidated her old lease agreement. And then I read her old lease agreement. I already know these contracts pretty well, but like I said, I don't usually delve into the minutiae. This time I did. We show up at court. Karen has her lawyer. Karen is bursting, grinning like a fool, like she's won the lottery. Her lawyer looks fairly happy as well. The judge asks me to speak. Me. I would like Karen to leave the apartments, but she is refusing, despite the fact that according to the court's last decision, she should have left over a month ago now. Judge. And Miss Karen? Lawyer. Miss Karen cannot be ejected from her home without a new notice. Yes, she has not yet paid past due rent. However, she and the landlord struck up a deal, giving her the time she needed to pay via verbal agreement. This deal, made directly after the last court date, invalidated the last decision, so Miss Karen will require a new decision, and therefore a new notice, before she can rightfully be evicted from her home. Until then, her lease agreement is still valid. Insert legal explanation. Judge. And landlord, what do you have to say? Me. Well, Your Honor, I have to agree. They have made a very, very compelling argument. Karen and I did indeed make a deal, giving her the time she needed to pay, and yes, her old lease agreement is still valid, I guess. Well, according to the terms of the still valid lease, there are some additional things that the court needs to be aware of, that I'd like to go over for clarification. I'm sure you have a copy, Your Honor. Judge. Yes, I do. Me. And you have a copy, lawyer? Lawyer. Yes, I do. Me. Excellent. Well, Your Honor, if you look at Section 4, subsection A on page 2, you will see that after 10 days of non-payment, a late fee of $100 is applied. If you continue reading to subsection B, you will see that after 15 days of non-payment, additional late fees of $10 per day are applied until full payment is rendered. If you continue to subsection C, you will see that failed payments necessitate a chargeback fee of $50 per failed payment. If you will continue, Your Honor, to page 4, section 7, subsection F, you'll see that if a tenant is in any way responsible for a loss of rent, including leaving an apartment in less than move-in ready condition, failed payments, or lastly, refusal to vacate in the case of an eviction, the tenant is responsible for payment of said loss of rent, in addition to any other debts owed. In addition, on page 8, section 14, subsection A, you'll note that the tenant is responsible for any and all legal fees resultant from the eviction process, including attorney's fees, such as for the attorney I hired to help me review this lease agreement. Finally, on page 10, the last page, section 17, subsection B, you will see that the tenant is responsible for all HVAC services rendered on their unit. As we send in a company to fix the unit in Karen's apartment at her request, we have the invoice here for the replacement unit, in addition to the totals for all of the fees listed. At this point, the lawyer has gone completely pale. It's clear that he was more concerned that I would fight the whole deal thing than the terms of the lease he thought he'd have to fight to keep valid. Karen looks utterly shell-shocked, her mouth slightly agape, like a child confused by a game of peekaboo. The judge, meanwhile, is completely unfazed until I hand her the invoice, alongside my math, a spreadsheet, and a piece of paper, with the total debt owed circled and highlighted at the bottom of the page. Her eyes widen to the size of her mouth, as her jaw drops with an audible gasp. Me. As you can see, Your Honor, the total owed is in excess of $16,000. I will happily accept the payment in the form of a cashier's check. I'd hate to have to charge yet another $50 fee for a failed payment should another personal check bounce. Judge, lawyer, do you have anything to say? At this point, the lawyer looks like he's about to pass out. Karen seems to have stopped breathing. The judge remains silent for a moment and then collects herself. Judge, I'm afraid you'll have to address that matter of debt in a different court than this one, landlord. We are here only to judge whether Miss Karen is to be evicted from her home today. Me. Oh, if she wants to stay, I'd be happy to let her, as long as she agrees to continue to abide by the terms of the lease agreement, specifically those clauses outlined above, and pays the debt owed today. Judge, I'm going to rule for a 24-hour notice to vacate, unless Miss Karen can produce payment at this moment. Karen sits still, quiet, speechless even. Her lawyer is eyeing the window, I like to think contemplating his decisions in life that led him to this point. Maybe thinking about jumping, I don't know. Judge, right, a 24-hour notice to vacate, and landlord? Me. Yes? Judge, you'll want to file those charges in small claims court or a higher court, if it exceeds the amount that you can legally pursue in small claims. Me. Already filed, Your Honor. The case has now been resolved, and needless to say, I got a fairly significant bonus, in addition to a slight raise. The next one is a petty revenge story. So a few things. I go to the gym to work out and decompress. I don't see it as a place to be social. I wear large over-ear headphones. I was at the gym and just finished one of my sets for deadlifts, when a guy walks over. This is something I'm used to, despite how much I dislike it. But he starts talking to me and I'm able to pick up he's flirting. I'm polite and waiting for the proper moment to end the conversation. When he asks for my number, I decline. He keeps talking and going into the usual shtick of why not and come on. At that point, I'm very uncomfortable and also annoyed because my workout timer has already gone off and it passed time for me to start my next set. I put on my big girl pants and tell him he's making me uncomfortable and I just want to finish my workout. Does he leave? No. He keeps talking now, going on about how he didn't mean it like that and he's not a bad guy. No actual apology to be found. Now during this entire interaction, I've had to fart. I was being polite and holding it in until he left, but seeing as he's not, I think, well, I know a way to get him to leave. As he's still talking, I let it go. It's silent, but rather smelly. It only takes about 2 seconds for him to catch a whiff. He stops talking, and the face he makes is too much that I have to bite my lip to stop laughing. That's when he gives me a look of, "Are you serious?" and the finally leaves. And I'm left alone to finish my workout. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Years ago, I was a photographer at a major theme park and worked with the characters on an almost daily basis. Our famous character is a mouse that owns the whole park. Everyone who worked there either referred to him as Boss or Mr. Mouse around guests. For the purposes of this post, I'll refer to him as Boss. One morning, I was assigned to work with the boss. He was in a mischievous mood and being an overall goofball. I enjoyed this, and so did our guest's character attendants. One of his favorite things to do when he was in a mischievous mood was try to pass me the autograph books he had signed, conveniently ignoring the fact that I had my hands full with a camera. As I went to take them, he'd drop them and run away, making a laughing motion. So, we're with this family, and Boss does his usual, pass the autograph books to the photographer stunt. He holds them out expectantly, and I said, "I'd love to, boss, but you know I don't know my ABCs. At this, the boss drops the books, takes my hand, moves me to a corner, and points to the floor, telling me to stay like I was a naughty child. Malicious compliance mode activated. "Okay, I guess I'm grounded," I said, pouting. Everyone at this point is howling with laughter, even our head manager, Diane, who had stepped in to watch. So Boss continues his interaction with the family. Now at the end of the session, we have the family pose with the character. So Boss gets everyone together and poses with the popular "ta-da!" except there's no photographer. After a moment, the boss motions to the family to wait and stomps over to my corner. I'm fighting back a grin at this point as he turns me around, points to my camera, and then held his hands up as if to say, "What gives?" "Boss, you told me I'm grounded, remember?" I said with a sweet, innocent smile. It's at this point Diane pipes in with, "That you did, Mr. Mouse." Boss playfully drags me back to my spot and poses again. We get the photo and send the family on their way. Diane stepped out with them and offered to send them through again to get more pictures because I didn't take many, on account of me being grounded. The family accepted, although the dad, who had tears in his eyes at this point, said it was the hardest he's laughed in a long time. To this day, it still brings a smile to my face. The next one is an entitled people story. Yesterday I found myself in an unfortunate situation. I had to be an adult. Horrifying, I know. It's all sunshine and daisies when you're a kid and you see all the grown-ups getting to stay up as late as they want and buy nice things. Now I go to bed earlier than I did when I was a kid and have to do things like make myself go to the doctor or what have you. Pretty sure I would have stayed a Toys R Us kid if I'd known how much of a pain in the butt errands are. So I was coming from a doctor's appointment where I got shots and no lollipop, which is bogus, and going to spend way too much money on clothing for myself. I found myself driving hither and yon, mentally chiding myself for being so short-sighted when I was a kid. I had it made. Then there was a very long string of cars with hazards on and little flags all making the same turn. Know what's pretty high up there on the whole adulting importance scale? Not screwing with a funeral procession. When you see a hearse followed by a whole big long line of cars with their hazards on in the US, it's a funeral procession. It can suck if you're in a hurry, but there are certain things you simply do not do, such as honking at a funeral procession, or shouting, "What the hell, let's go," at the top of your lungs at a funeral procession, or getting fed up, cutting around the 3 cars in front of you, and then bullying your way through a funeral procession making a turn. You know when it's extra super duper important to not do that? When it's a firefighter's funeral procession. Not only because this is a person who willingly enters burning buildings to save people and thus merits respect. You ever see a burning building? I have. You know what I did? Stood there slack-jawed and just watched. But because where there's a funeral for a firefighter, there are other emergency responders, like EMS or, cops, lots and lots and lots and lots of cops, all of whom are not in a good mood. So I'm the first in a line of spectators at a T intersection where the funeral procession is driving towards me and turning right. Some idiot 2 cars back in a Porsche starts honking impatiently after 2 minutes. At minute 3, he sticks his head out the window and shouts something out the window, like it's going to help. Gives up on honking and just lays on the horn at minute 4. The procession proceeds because funeral. I roll up my window because loud. At minute 5, the Porsche decides the heads-up play is to just cut the wheel, zip around the cars in front of them, and then shove their way through the funeral procession. He made it about 5 car lengths past cutting off a funeral procession before he got cut off and pulled over by a state trooper, who immediately had backup in the form of the next 3 cars in the procession. They were still there when the procession finally ended. I may or may not have waved on my way past. The next one is an entitled parent story. We're going back in time to 2004, when I worked at a chain department store. Let's just call it Le Bon Bon, haha. I was 22 YO at the time and floated between the departments. That evening, I was covering the kids department by myself, facing and folding, fixing the tables, checking the changing rooms, etc. A woman with 3 small children, let's say 3, 5, and 7 if I had to guess, was at a table pulling out shirts to hold them up and then tossing them back in crumpled heaps, forming a pile. Her kids joined in, making a mess as well. Ugh, I'd have to straighten and fix the entire table. The woman and her kids move along. I fix the table, which takes some time, before returning to the counter. I hear kids laughing and shrieking. Close to the counter in the kids section, we had a little round sitting area facing a wall of TVs. Various kid-friendly shows played on low volume on each screen. It was a chaotic scene to behold. The 3 kids were there jumping and climbing all over the short benches, no mother in sight. I do a quick search and cannot find her. I get my manager next. LP is pulled in. We talk to the kids, who are super hyper, to get their mother's name. We call her over the loudspeaker. We wait. No one comes. Our LP contacts mall security. They call her over their loudspeaker. 10 minutes later, she comes storming in, furious, a bag from another store and a huge cup from the food court in her hands. She demands to know why we called her. We explain the situation with her kids being left unattended in our store. She flips out, stating that the girl, she points at me, is there to watch kids in the kids section, and that's why there's a big wall of TVs there. It's so mothers can go shopping stress-free. LP and my manager tell her that's now how it works. She asks if we have any idea what it's like to go out shopping with 3 young kids in tow. She is frothing at the mouth. At this point, her kids are tearing up tables again, running and screaming, having a blast. She is asked to leave and throws her cup of soda at the floor. Before we can do anything else, she grabs up her smallest child and shrieks at them that they are leaving. Le Bonbon is the most horrible place ever, and she'll be calling corporate about our misconduct. It's been 20 years. Sometimes I still wonder how those kids turned out. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.